Hello. Welcome to the third presentation on the Totem Heritage Center's History of Northwest Coast Art Speakers Series. Our goal with this series is to expose students and viewers to the art and culture of the Northwest Coast First Nations. This series of 6 virtual presentations focuses on a variety of Northwest Coast art topics with conversations between artists, historians, and educators. And if you have missed any of the previous presentations, check out our Ketchikan Museum's YouTube channel. Tonight's presentation will be followed by a Q&A with the Native Art Studies program students who are participating in this Zoom class. We are very pleased to have tonight's speakers with us tonight. David Robert Boxley is an esteemed Tsimshian artist from Metlakatla, Alaska, who expresses the love and respect he has for Tsimshian culture through his art, cultural performance, and teaching. His elegant design style is drawn from a strong tradition of Tsimshian carving and design and has been heavily influenced by the teachings of his father, David A. Boxley, and the Old Masters. Kathryn Bunn Marcuse is the curator of Northwest Native Art and director of the Bill Holmes Center for the Study of Northwest Native Art at the Burke Museum and assistant professor of art history at the University of Washington. Her most recent book is Unsettling Native Art Histories on the Northwest Coast, co-edited with Aldana Janitis. And Katie and Aldana participated in a museum midday with us discussing this book. So you should all definitely check that out on our YouTube channel. Katie, I believe you will be starting things off tonight.
I'll do it. Waisam. Absim luam kodu. Dem hakskudak wasam a hoepel gjaon. Gibam nacha di wayu. Lach gibu dipt ero. Takwandi wil watko at a kwa di wil zago. A jigsakodu. Dem tral hakskud wil goskam hana gwa. Gu nasipensku as de hele gik all. En komt gegodu. Dem de achtum dem side hoi. Hail the go the awesome hoopagwa. Hello everyone. I'm really happy to be with you all this evening. My name is David Robert Boxley. Gibam Nacha is my Tsimshian name. I'm from the Wolf Clan from Metlakatla, Alaska. Proud to be joined with this very smart lady who's my friend. Been friends for a long time. And I hope we get to share with you all a whole lot of things from our experience, and you'll probably catch us just nerding out because we're both such fans of what we're going to talk about. So I recognize a whole bunch of my former students. Hope you've been drawing. I hope you all felt this chill go up your backs when I asked that. And I'll pass it over to Katie. Thanks.
All right, well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you too, Davey. We have known each other a long time, and it's really fun to have any excuse to spend time talking about the artworks together. I'm Kathryn Bunn Marcuse, and I was already introduced, but I just want to say that I appreciate coming to you from Coast Salish territory. I work at the Burke Museum, and you can see behind me the Northwest Native Art Gallery at the Burke Museum with a prominent David A. Boxley pole in the middle of the gallery, and some wonderful exhibits curated by a number of artists from along the Northwest Coast. So I hope you can come to the Burke. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, but I want to acknowledge not only the Coast Salish, on whose territory I'm a guest, but also all the communities whose cultural heritage is so far from their traditional territories and to whom we are responsible for their care at the Burke. And so what Davey and I thought we would do tonight is that I'll spend about 15 minutes telling you a little bit about the Burke and what goes on at the University of Washington and museums and the programs we have to invite artists and community members into museums. And then Davey's going to pick up with a little bit about his experience learning about artwork in museums and going there since he was a kid as a child. And then we'll just come together and talk about some great art pieces. So, and listen to your questions, which will be wonderful. So I'm just going to share my screen to get started. Sorry, I have to stop 1 second and just make sure that I can show you a little video later. Okay. Okay, here we are. So coming to you from the Burke Museum, and some of you may have been there a long time in the past, but in 2019, we opened a brand new Burke Museum building, and we were very excited to do that. We had some wonderful guests from across all of the Indigenous communities that came together and helped us open the Burke and helped us to honor the Coast Salish land that we're on, and all of the other territories and communities who we work with. And so I won't show you all of our slides, but I'll tell you a little bit. The Burke has, they tell us that we have 18 million objects in the Burke and cultural creations. It's a natural history and culture museum, so that means we have biology and paleontology and fishes and all of those things. And so 18 million objects means a totem pole and a whale and a Tyrannosaurus Rex and a bottle of fish eggs with 200 eggs, and we count each one of those. So that helps when you're trying to build a new museum. And what we thought at the old museum, people would come and be excited about the displays, but they were really excited to go behind the scenes. And so we wanted to show people what it is that we do, not just the public displays, but all the work that goes on behind in collections, and let that become part of the experience of the everyday viewer, so kids can see all the different things that you can do in a museum, all the different kinds of jobs, all the scientists, all of the cultural representatives, all of those things. And this was in the old Burke, people coming behind the scenes to look at what we did. And so we wanted to make that new and available in the new Burke. So we started to pack. There was a lot of packing to do. And we packed up all the shells and all the bugs and all the fishes and all the cultural creations and the whales. And once they were packed, the old Burke, where some of you may have spent a lot of time, was taken down. We said goodbye to it in all of the ways that we could. And then we moved into this wonderful new building. So the question was, how are we going to make this reality of seeing through the Burke and seeing all of the things that we do available to the public? So some of it was to design galleries in which you could look. There would be a section like this has, where you can look into actually our collection storage. So it's not open storage the way some people do, because you could just sort of get little glimpses. But you see, these are the collection shelves, and they're on what are called compactors. So they roll, so the shelves move along, and every day you might see a different sort of section of it that you can peer through in the window and see people working there, and community members coming and visiting. And we also have space for people to do that privately as well. We commissioned some wonderful new artwork. Here's a piece by Alison Bremner, who some of you may know, wonderful Tlingit artist, and she was also one of the co-curators for our Northwest Native Art Gallery at the New Burke. And we moved into the New Burke, and we also had some wonderful new commissions for public artwork. It's part of that 0.5% for art program. So for the first time, there is a public art of Columbia River Chinookan art in Seattle. And of course, the Columbia River is so important to all of the Northwest Coast, and this wonderful set of bronze canoe paddles in the Chinookan style greets everybody as they come into the Burke. And you see them create this almost sundial across the outside area as the shadows of the paddles make one big sweep during the whole day. In the lower lobby, we have a glass piece welcoming, it's called The Weaver's Welcome, by local artists Brian Perry and Preston Singletary, who you may know, and Anthony Jones and David Franklin. But what I want to tell you a little bit about today is the opportunities for artists to work at the Burke. And we're lucky, David Boxley Sr. works in the area. He's come many times with students and apprentices, and other artists from all across the coast have come down to spend time in the Burke's collections. And part of how we do this is the legacy of Bill Holm and Robin Wright. And so Bill Holm was a curator here at the Burke Museum for many years, and many of you know him from the books he's written on Northwest Coast art. And Robin Wright followed him as curator, and she founded the Bill Holm Center for the Study of Northwest Native Art. And the center was founded specifically to provide resources and funding and staff so that we could create greater access for artists and community members to come in and study at the Burke. And so we've had hundreds of people and sponsored workshops, sponsored the travel and time for people to come down and spend time, often with a mentor or an apprentice. So here we have Dempsey Bob and New Hulk artist Latham Mack. This was in the old Burke workspace, but we still do this here. And we run a grant program so that artists and community members can apply and have their travel and their hotel and all of that put into place. So it's closed right now, but next fall those will open again. And I will encourage all of you who are young artists or members who want to come and spend time with your cultural material to apply and come down to the Burke. And so I want to show you a little video just about how people experience coming to the Burke and what the Bill Holm Center does. And you'll see a familiar face in this video. It's just about 2.5 minutes long. So let's make that go.
Contemporary Native art could be called art that is done now. And it could also mean that you are using ancient techniques in a new and creative manner.
One of the hallmarks of Bill's career here is his door was always open to anybody off the street who would walk in with a question about something they found in their grandmother's attic, or Native artists who just wanted to see examples of the kinds of things that they were trying to make.
Years ago, the way to teach people was in an apprenticeship manner. A person who was learning from an elder and a teacher spent years of helping them prepare their material before they even helped them weave. So that is why something like the Bill Holm Center for Northwest Coast Study is so important, because there has been an erosion of the apprenticeship system.
With each museum I go to, I always learn something. It doesn't matter, if it's a small thing, it's a pattern, it's an ending, or gives me an idea to do something new.
What's important is the thing that the Burke holds these objects, and these are the energies of our ancestors are sitting right here. That program that opens the doors and says, we not only will welcome you, we will help you with your finance and your time to come here. Studying like this is an extension of our apprenticeship with our ancestors, and that's very important.
Okay, so that's a little bit about what we do. You can see people spending time in the collections, and it's artists who want to learn exactly how to make things that were there in 100 years ago from their community, and artists who are making things that look entirely new and have never existed before. But as we know, right, artists are always responding to the questions of their time, and the answers that artists come up with, all that knowledge is in those old pieces. And so when people come and spend time with them, there's a lot of learning to be done by everyone. People bring a lot of knowledge with them and are often generous and share that with the museum. And there's so much teaching to be done by those particular old masters and the pieces themselves. And Davey and I will look at some of those in a little bit. Of course, Davey spent some time at the Burke over the years and participated in a show called Here and Now Native Artists Inspired that we did in 2014 and 2015. And made a new puppet based on one of the old Tsimshian puppets in our collection. He's also come and spent time with his buddy Tyson Brown. And I did steal this picture of him and Tyson also studying or visiting at the Kyle Nagai Haida Gwaii Museum. So I know that he has been in museums and spent time wondering and learning and discussing all of these old pieces with his dad and with his colleagues and his friends. And we're very fortunate also to have an artist studio right in the Northwest Native Art Gallery. If you look, well, actually in this picture, it's on the other side of me, but, and this is Davey's dad, David A. Boxley, demonstrating in the studios. And that's a wonderful thing that artists can do when they come and visit as well. So I have lots of other pictures of the galleries and things, but I think I'll turn it over to Davey to talk a little bit about his time spending time in museums. So.
Thanks, Katie.
David, do you want me to just take down the photos?
Leave that one up and maybe in a minute pop back to the ones with Tyson.
Okay. That'd be great.
So my dad, he started his career, he was a basketball coach. That's what he went to school to be. He coached Metlakatla's high school team here. And he left to go to achieve more as a basketball coach. And when he got married to my mom and we moved back home, the head coaching position was taken. And my dad was really getting interested in our people's history and art. He had been a bit of an artist before that. He minored in art in college. And he'd been doing some oil paintings, scenes of people carving totem poles or paddling canoes, and decided he wanted to start carving. And he would go to the hardware store and get some X-Acto knives and 4x4s and start hacking away, following pictures in books. And what he would do is just copy very poorly these old Tlingit and Haida totem poles that he could find in books. He often has to be careful how he phrases that. He said, I make the terrible copies of these terrible Tlingit and Haida poles. And I said, Dad, you got to phrase that better. That's not what you mean. Your copies were terrible. The old poles were great. And when my great grandmother died, my dad was raised by his grandparents. When she died, he decided he was going to give a potlatch and raise the first totem pole ever in our community when I was just over a year old. So my life, one of the earliest stories of me existing is, pooping on the floor of his first workshop as like a year, 6.5 months old or whatever. And he likes to tell that story. And I guess I've heard it enough that I'm not embarrassed to tell it myself anymore. But so I've been surrounded by this, the smell of cedar chips that's my life. When I smell that, that's my existence in this world. And he very early on started taking me with him on his journey, whether it was, he had a totem pole commission and he was going to go put it up. But he made a point of going to study the old pieces. And I started carving at 6 years old, and it was around that time that he started taking me around. And he'd only been carving for about 7 years before that. So my dad and my carving career is not as far apart in time as you might think. I sold my first mask at 7, and I'm 40 years old. So there are days that, while in number-wise I'm not an old man, there are times that I feel I've had a whole career already. And he taught me that because of what happened to our people and the lack of knowledge of the old times that was in our community, that we had to go back and learn from those old masters, and that was the way to do it, to go to museums. And when, he really instilled that in me. And when the Transforming Image came out in 2001, I took that same attitude with that book. And all of you who took my Formline class know how much that book, how much I referenced that and how much it meant to me. But I took those same lessons. And the thought came to me that if I could just learn how the art works the way the old masters understood it, that whatever I do from there is the natural progression of the art. Because I have to go back to that foundation in order for it to move on. I find, and being my opinion, that if you don't take the time to learn that firm foundation, the changes that end up being made don't feel like they belong with the art form. And I very much wanted, like when my dad and I did this house front that's behind me, wanted it to feel like it belonged with those other old Simpson house fronts. I've had a very, very fortunate childhood, and it continued on into adulthood of he and I traveling all around, and that has moved into collections in Europe that I've been able to look at. And I think the thing that astounds me when I go, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in a little while, but is not only the sophistication of the old pieces and the delicate nature of so many of the old pieces. Modern Northwest Coast art has, I think, because so many people reference photos, whether they be of old pieces or contemporary artists that they love. Northwest Coast art has kind of exploded size-wise. You get these big carvings. When, to me, some of the most impressive things ever made are this big and almost float in your hand. They're so lightweight. But the other thing that's astounding that I wish everybody, especially our own people, could understand is just how much of our art is out there around the world, and that our cultures were not simple or primitive, that no society could have created that much art unless it was completely advanced. I often say you don't create art like that if you're worried about what you're going to eat in the morning. And it makes me very proud, but it also is something that I hope other people get to experience. And that's been one of my best experiences working with the Burke over the years. And again, I started this early enough that I got to work with Bill Holm. He gave me tips one time in a math class that I was sitting in on. He painted some drums with us in my house here in Metlakatla in 1994 when we were preparing for my great-grandfather's memorial potlatch. Worked with Robin, went with my dad when we spoke in her classes, and then transferred over to working with Katie. One of the things I wanted to talk about before we get into the fun part of the discussion tonight is how much relationships with museums have changed that I've witnessed in my lifetime. When I was a little kid, I remember we'd go to certain museums and We couldn't touch the pieces. The curators would ask us what kind, what angle of photos we wanted and that kind of thing. And it was a very separated feeling. They weren't our objects to go see, is how it felt, even though we knew they were. And that's changed a lot in my lifetime, thankfully. A lot of museums now, especially the Burke, but other ones are following suit, where they treat it as though they are the caretakers of our things. And they allow us to come and see them. We just got to let them know we're coming. And they make accommodations. And with, the Bill Holmes Center, they'll even pay your way if you get the grant fellowship. So things have changed a lot. And I would impress upon anybody who chooses to go and do this kind of thing, to make good relationships with these folks. I've often seen in it's funny, younger people, some of them are probably my generation, but I feel old when it comes to a lot of this. And younger folks who are understandably angry at how we got to this point, how there are thousands of our pieces, millions or whatever, hundreds of thousands of pieces of Northwest Coast art spread over the world. And while I understand, there are opportunities that can come from working with good people who want us to have access to these things again. And progress is being made even with repatriations. I was able to help get a piece repatriated here to Metlakatla last year. So times are changing, and relationships with museums who care for our objects is a good thing. These photos with Tyson and I, one of the best side effects of going to work for Robert Davidson, besides everything I learned from the man, was I met my best bud here, this Tyson Brown. His comes from a long line of great Haida artists, and he is, in my opinion, one of the very best modern formline designers there is. And we bonded over that, and then became friends apart from that also. But and we share that same feeling of just losing our minds when we find something super cool. This pictures here of us in the Burke on the left. We pulled out some pieces that we realized pretty quick were all by the same artist. You could pick apart piece by piece. If you learn formline well enough, you can start to pick out commonalities that most people wouldn't be able to see. Often even down to just someone's ovoid shape. Sometimes you can tell another artist's work just by the shape of their ovoid. And there were 4 different bentwood pieces. One was a bowl, I think, and there were 3 boxes. And you could line them up, and you could look down the line at the designs and point out the similarities all the way down, even to the point where some of the same templates maybe were used for their ovoids. And it's just so fun. And even getting information about them and being able to guess at maybe where they were from because of where they were collected, that they looked like they were traded outward from Haida Gwaii. So they were probably this Haida artist, and the pieces were traded north into Kaigani territory and Tlingit territory. There's so much left for us to put together, and working with museums is the only, well, not the only, books too, but is one of the best ways to learn from the old masters. The knowledge is there. Studying form, studying proportion, style, flow, all of these things I truly feel are crucial, and I just want to impress. And again, this, it's just my opinion, but in my experience, the work you put in to truly understanding how and why your people's style is the way it is is going to make whatever you choose to do new with that knowledge better, because it will fit the cultural context that you're trying to be a part of. Because we are, even with a century of or more of disconnection between us and the old masters, we are their descendants, and I believe it's our responsibility to preserve that sophistication, but of course take it, run with it, and make it our own at the same time. And the last thing I'll share is I was at the State Museum in Juneau, and there was a bentwood box that happened to be in the collection. It wasn't going to be put on display because it was found at a grave site and it was going to be sent back to its people. But they carbon dated it to about 1375, and it was fully fleshed out form line on it, which in my mind set back the estimates on when form line developed. It was clear, absolutely clear as day what it was. It was just beautiful. And I think that knowing that form line took, it wasn't just made up in the 1880s. It took, a couple thousand years to develop this sophisticated art style. It's why you can't stop at ovoids and U-forms. And learning from the old masters helps give you that information so that we don't accidentally simplify something that took a very long time to perfect. And I've learned that in museums and made great friendships and relationships. Like I said, Katie and I've known each other since I feel like we were kids. I'm a little bit younger than her, but I felt like kids to me. And I remember you were still student teaching, and your eyes were this big.
And you were 18 the first time you came to lecture in my class.
Yeah, and I've also been an old man my whole life. My dad said at 4 years old I'd walk into department stores and shake somebody's hand and say, "I'm David Boxley." So I don't know, all that to say, I hope you all, if you really are studying art, whether it's academically or to be artists yourselves, go study and don't stop studying. The minute you stop growing. And there's far too much for us to keep learning about. So that's what I've got for now. And let's start nerding out here.
Yeah, and well, I'll follow up on what you said about there's so much to learn. And so I want to commend the Ketchikan Museum and the students who are in this class for learning, but I'm going to make a little shout out here. University of Washington is a great place to come, and you can come and study Northwest Coast art with me as an undergraduate or a graduate, MA, PhD. There's also wonderful Indigenous faculty across the university who are in a lot of different fields. And I have a big concern that there aren't enough people going into these studies, and we really need more people. There's so much work still to be done. It would be fabulous to have Indigenous students from the coast coming along and studying their own heritage, but the heritage from all over, and coming into these positions in museums, and that there's not enough. So get in touch with me and let's figure out how to get you to the University of Washington or somewhere else if you are interested. So I'll say that. And additionally, we need more publications. Now that museums often have all their pictures online, I think people aren't as dependent on the books, but the books do give you a lot of nice context and other ways of approaching the material besides just, Google and the image search that you get. So yeah, that question, there's so many things to know. I still feel like my eyes are like this big, and I have, my husband always teases me that he says, I always say, I have so many questions. And that's it. So Davey and I thought we just picked out some things that we thought were interesting and some things that we wanted to talk about. And one of the things we wanted to talk about is something that you already brought up, Davey, which is scale, right? And you've talked about how things now seem to be really big, but we'll look at a few examples maybe of things that are small and delicate, but also this, one of sort of the basic, when you take Northwest Coast 101, one of the things you learn about form line is that, the story is you can take the ovoids and the U's and the whole system, and it can be on a tiny little spoon handle, or it can be as big as the front of a house, right? But I was going to ask Davey, tell me a little bit about the making, right? So you love to make totem poles, the great big things, but you love these small things too.
Yeah.
And what are as a artist, when you come to something small and big, where are the places where you're changing, or let's say you make a little maquette model pole before your big pole, and how does that scale, and how does your approach change when you're thinking about using sort of the same designs but on different size pieces?
Well, with totem poles, the sculptural part ends up being, if you really work at it, pretty much the same. The way that I learned to approach, especially after working with Robert Davidson, is that you make the same amount of cuts on a maquette that you do on a large pole. It's the same pole, it's just at a different size. The one thing that that changes the most to me is anytime there's form line used on a maquette, you have to make, especially the fine lines or tertiary lines that go around ovoids and things like that, are much larger on a maquette than they would be proportionally than on a large totem pole. And if you were to scale up a maquette, one of the things you would have to change are some of those design proportions for it to not look big and clunky once it was blown up. And I think that's what it's a good thing to clarify. What I meant earlier about the size of modern Northwest Coast art is the thing that gets lost, I think, and the house front is a good example. If I sketch a little design, I know I want to lay out something for a big project, fine, I can get the sense of the design on a piece of paper. But when I go to blow that up, if I left it the way I drew it on the paper, the design is way too simple for the size. Some of the flow has to be adjusted just a bit. And like on this house front, if I drew it small, I wouldn't have room to get all the detail that's possible when you draw it big. So like what we did on this house front is I did a sketch on paper. It must have been 18 or 20 inches wide. Took that to I think it was still Kinko's at the time, or FedEx office now, and had it blown up on these big sheets. And the only thing we transferred from that original drawing to the boards was the primary form line. Everything else we redrew by hand and added more than what was on the sketch, because when it's big, you have more options. And I think that's one of the things, and again, especially when beginners skip steps, they think, okay, if I've drawn a solid ovoid this tiny on a little piece of paper and I blow that up, that I can just leave it the way it is. And the way the design system works is, no, you can't. You have to do something with that big giant space, especially if it threatens the size of the rest of the form line. So there's always going to be an adjustment, switching from small to big and big to small. You can't have a big fancy design like this house front, and shrink that down onto a 5x7 greeting card and expect to really be able to make out everything that's going on in there. The best thing would be to simplify your design. And those are things you just, again, learn with time, but you learn by study. You realize, okay, what did the old masters do on something this size, and what did they do on something that you could hold in your hand? And that scaling, it's like this house, the frontlet that's on the right here, these little faces. So the main face of the frontlet is this very classic Tsimshian style face. But if you look at the small faces around it, they are these small hybrid sculptural form line faces, because that's the amount of detail that the tools of the time could achieve. And they made it work, with what they could do. And even now, faces that small would be hard, but we do have tools now where I'm confident, if I really was nuts, that I could make all of those little faces the same style as that main face. But I don't think I would, because the old masters didn't. I think, like, there's that part of me that's like, well, they were all right with it being like that. I'm going to be all right with it being like that. And actually looking at it, we talked about this over the weekend. That's fascinating to see half form line, half sculpture in these little faces. You don't see a whole lot of that happening. It's usually one or the other. The other closest you get to that is often on the bottom, the belly of a raven rattle, where the beak starts to come out of the form line face that's on the bottom.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, you're talking to some real form line knowledgeable people, but for those who aren't quite so aware of it, I think what Davey is mentioning up here is that these faces, while sculptural, have all of the sort of elements of a 2D drawn face that's then just a little bit pulled out into low relief, as opposed to the much more naturalistic form of this kind of face. And Davey, you said you loved this piece as well. And it too has these faces that are just on that low relief. So they're 2D design conceptions.
Mm-hmm.
And then just brought out a little bit on top of this, fully realized raven face.
I got to see this recently. I was lucky enough. I was in Europe. I was in Geneva for another, working with a museum over there. And I had a weekend, and we went to Paris basically for a day, which I don't recommend to anyone. You need more than a day. It was nuts trying to see us all we could see. And went to the Louvre, which is also impossible to see in a day. I thought I'd been to big museums before. The Louvre is a city unto itself. It's ridiculous how much stuff is in there. And but I got to go back, and one of the Tsimshian stone masks is there. That's why I went. And then I turned around, and there was this beautiful old headdress. And you can't quite see it, but that sculpture that's on the bottom, there's a little guy perched in there, the face and his whole body, and he's crunched up down underneath it. And it's everything is just carved so well. One of the things I thought I'd point out while we're talking, but that I look at when I go to these museums, again, is flow. And even though the sculpture of this creature is sculptural, it's 3D, it's not meant to be two-dimensional design. If you look at the flow of the eyebrow, it matches the flow and curve of the beak. The whole thing has this flow to it, which also connects directly to how formline works. So even though Northwest Coast sculpture can be realistic, this has technically cheekbones and the edge of the eye orb showing there. It's meant to be somewhat naturalistic. It still uses that curve. You look at the curve of the beak, it's not straight. They didn't lay they didn't have rulers back then, but they didn't lay, the edge of a board down or something. They used what I think is the curve of their elbow to make this arc. And it's just gorgeous. And the inlay and everything. And again, it's not huge. It's maybe 18 or 20 inches long, and it's just enough to fit, you know, up on top of your head. And just beautiful.
Yeah, and you mentioned this when you were talking earlier, the incredible lightness of so many of these things that were made to be danced or made to be worn, you know, for long periods of time.
Yeah, I mean, because I've made that mistake where I've thought I'm gonna make this big mask. Oh, it's gonna be real impressive. If you don't hollow that thing out enough, there's one we use in Githon. I don't know if I should let this out to the world, but a lot of those big masks nowadays, you know, will build in supports that like rest on your shoulders or something that's hidden behind the drape so that it's not all on you. The big wolf mask that we use, I just wear that on my head like a headdress. So that, you know, and it's this huge, it must be close to, you know, 3.5 feet long. My neck is the only thing supporting that big mask. And I probably could have hollowed it out a little bit better. You know what I mean? There's been times where we've been dancing where, oh man, I wish I'd spend another day just getting this as skinny. The other side of that though is that things are fragile. And you know, we travel so much more now than they would have in the old days with these pieces that and you see it when you look in museums. The things that are most fragile are often the ones that you'll see that are broken from time and rough handling, or just that, you know, a raven rattle is so thin. Some parts of it, you know, are like a 1/16 of an inch thin, where the rocks, or nowadays we use BBs, go inside the belly to make the sound. This is a really fascinating raven rattle. There's a standard structure to raven rattles. Usually there's the main bird, guy sitting on its back, sometimes with a frog, sometimes not, and usually a tongue that connects the guy in the back to a what I think is a kingfisher head that makes the tail of the rattle. That's the standard structure of these rattles. And this one has taken the general structure and really changed a lot. So there's these spaces on the bottom where some kind of tongue, I don't know why it's textured that way, is coming out of those faces, and the guy in the back is holding on to it. And the kingfisher isn't there anymore. There's just this beautifully sculpted face that's on the tail. It's not quite as how do I put it? It's not as crisp and perfect as some of the old rattles, but there is something. This sculpture was really amazing, and was able to really create like I feel something looking at, especially that face on the tail. It's just fantastic. Where his form line is simple, kind of clunky actually, but it doesn't matter as much because of the I don't know, genius of the overall sculpture. It's really something. So that's a good thing to point out, that not every artist is going to be great at every part of what they're doing. So while this isn't like that weird design on the tail is just those triangles, that's odd to me, but it goes with the rest of the style of this thing.
Yeah, I find that face, I mean, we're looking at a big slide of it, but of course that face is an inch, you know, 2 inches, and it's such a powerful face. And of course, when we get right up close to the form line, sometimes we think, oh, this is a little bit clunky, or, you know, or I think, but as you say, we have to think about the scale of these things, and books are one of the ways that in the digital images, we lose understanding how small and how big things are because of pictures like this, and in classrooms as well. So going to the museum when you see how big something is, or there's a wonderful new book, which I'm going to give a little shout out to, called Where the Power Is. Ooh, it's not working well in my virtual background, but anyway, oh, there it is. Where the Power Is. Karen Dufik, Bill McLennan, Jordan Wilson. And one of the things I loved about this book, and a few of the pictures we're looking at tonight is from it, is that many of the pieces, they show people holding them. And you really get a sense not only of the connection between community members and their cultural heritage, but the scale of everything. And that's one of the most important part about coming to museums. And as Davey is saying, you need to sit with it, pick it up, turn it over, look underneath, right? You were talking this weekend that one of the amazing thing about raven rattles, they're so complex, and yet you can get at every part of it with your tool. Of course you can, because that's how they're made.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's all. The thing that is the most amazing to me about those raven rattles is all the complicated stuff is all one piece of wood. Nothing's added on. Only thing that's added is the bottom. So all that under the figure and all that detail stuff is all from one piece of wood. And I think carving a raven rattle is harder than carving a simple totem pole. It's kind of
going small. I mean, we were going to talk a little bit about scale, and I was I have a special affinity for silver bracelets. But looking at, some of the masterpieces by Charles Edenshaw, and I have noticed over the years that if somebody's small work is good, you can start looking for that. You're going to know that the big stuff is going to be really amazing. And the ability to understand how much you can put in a space, and Edenshaw puts a lot of other people to shame by how much he could put into these spaces.
Yeah.
But we know that these little ovoids can fit, or the U forms can fit 2 little stacked U's inside. And if you go to the house front that's behind Davy, you're going to have a whole lot more space to fill in that secondary area. And I just have to show this because it's one of my favorites. I spent some time looking at the European floral work that was influenced on the coast. And I always like to show a few pictures of these because a lot of times people don't know about them. But you look at some of those designs, and artists were thinking about scale there, right? They're learning, they're being inspired by things like the carving on the back of these ships. So this is the backside of a whole big early trading ship from the 1700s. Or what was these rubbings are from the back of chairs in Father Duncan's cottage in Metlakatla. And then these are 2 great little bracelets. But even here you can see this artist on the left, Duncan Ganalon, has absolutely perfect control of how much space there is and how the flow of the design is going to be distributed over that space. And some of my other favorites, this is one of my other favorites, and it has a beautiful American eagle on the front. But you can see he's just not quite in control of that flow in that space as much as some others, right? And so Davey and I spent some time this weekend looking at, pieces that are incredibly powerful that don't always work, or that work at certain scales and not some others. And so this is that same carver, Duncan Ganalon, working on a very small scale, and then putting these European floral work along the side of one of the poles.
And that influence, our people have been doing that every time we're introduced to something new. It seems we find a way to incorporate that into our culture. And but I've found, because I've gotten to study some of these. Matter of fact, that center bracelet, I'm pretty sure I've held that one in my hand, if I recall. I think Robert brought it in to his studio. There is something about formline that is not terribly dissimilar to this style of design. And I've taken some of this, just like on this totem pole, and incorporated that into like the spout of a killer whale,
Mhm.
you know, and it works. But I also think that understanding of the art form first helped to make it work, to make it feel like it flows with our art. And so in my mind, these floral bracelets, even though they were inspired off of those ships, I mean, this is just as much anymore Haida art
Yes.
as anything else.
Absolutely. That's the argument when I wrote about these in the Charles Edenshaw catalog. That's the argument I was making. These are Haida art. And I was fascinated when I started looking at the floral designs that there are, as I said, the pattern of flow and space, but also patterns of symmetry, divided either vertically, horizontally, sometimes rotationally. And there's other kinds of mathematical terms, reflection and others, that these artists were doing with the floral elements,
right,
in terms of symmetrical repetition and layout, that is very much in line with the concepts that are used in formline design.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. And it was one of those things that it's too bad it got, because everything kind of ended after this period, as far as this was the last gasp I see of that, the explosion of Northwest Coast art that came with the introduction of modern tools and modern paints, and potlatching was huge. And we went into, after that, in the early 1900s, into kind of a dark ages, as it were, because of what happened to us. But Edenshaw was classically trained, learning from his uncle, and survived smallpox and, missionaries, and taking the name Charles and all that, and becoming kind of the first modern Northwest Coast artist, and doing what I do now. I'm not saying I'm as good as Charles Edenshaw. I don't think any of us honestly are as good as Edenshaw, but he adapted, just like those floral bracelets, pieces like this, that, it's like the thinker. But from that depth of knowledge that came from his traditional training. And that's why his stuff stands out even today, because of that basis in and knowledge of the cultural context, which I think behooves anybody who's wanting to go into this art. Don't just study the art. The culture should come with it. When you separate the culture from it, you lose the reason for it being the way it is. Now, this bowl, this is in Victoria. If anybody ever wants to go to the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, it's right by the ferry that comes up from Washington, next to the Empress Hotel. And if you go, we should go to the Empress for tea. Their high tea is excellent. This could very well be an Edenshaw carved bowl, but it's in the Simpson section of the RBC Museum, so I'm claiming it. Everyone can fight me on Facebook about it afterwards. I'm sure my buddy Tyson will argue with me. This is one of my favorite pieces of all time, from the leaves on the stick that the beaver is gnawing on to, and you can't see it in this photo, and I wish I had better photos, but on the back, that's the beaver's tail going down the back, but there's an eagle's head coming out of the beaver tail. A beaver is a main crest of the Eagle clan, at least for Simpson people, but beaver is also a Haida eagle crest. And then you can just make out the beaver's back feet going out, but then the eagle's wings wrap around the backside under the bowl. And this bowl is only, I would say, about 11 inches long. It's not enormous. It's one of the prettiest darn things ever made.
Yeah. Well, we had an interesting conversation about the things that hit us so much because they're just masterful and beautiful. And we looked at a few things that I found had that same, had a big impact. And then as you look more closely, it's not necessarily because all of the elements are exactly the proportions or the way that you think they might be. This was one of those ones that we looked at.
It sure makes an impact. I mean, it does what it's meant to do. That's supposed to be a big menacing face. I love seeing the grease still leaking out of it after goodness knows how long. But yeah, it's not I'm being a little snooty here, but after studying Northwest Coast art all my life, it's not the most well done, technically well done face I've ever seen. But if a piece makes you go, whoa, it's done more than being technically good. Some things that are ultra clean, the most beautiful technical carving you've ever seen, lack soul.
Mm-hmm.
And this has got soul,
yeah,
all the way.
Right. We were discussing, right? So if you had laid out this face on paper, you might put the eyeballs in a slightly different place, balancing them in the middle of that surrounding large ovoid, eye ovoid.
Yeah.
And that would follow sort of the symmetry and the place where they usually rise and float to within that space.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy's, maybe he's a little almost cross-eyed compared to where we would think they would land. And yet it is that makes this creature look like it's really looking at you, right?
Yeah.
And then you see the little guy who's either the spirit being or being eaten or being menaced or whatever it is. So it has the impact it's supposed to have because of that.
His little feet down there at the bottom.
I love the little feet.
Super cool.
Yeah. And we had some others that also had that emotional impact, or I love it when you come across a face. There are more faces that are more emotional than we think there are in Northwest Coast art. Right, a little smile here and the not smiling face.
And again, not the cleanest carving or even the proportions. One could argue it's this or that, but it comes with that soul that counters that need for it to be as pretty as some other Northwest Coast art is. This is a beautiful little telescoping chest, and both from the painted designs on it, I really like the inside box's design, which even has kind of a contemporary feel to me, the way that eagle's, I think it's an eagle, or that bird's beak ends without, the rest of the design fits within that rectangular shape. And then it just lets that right side where the eagle's head ends just end, and it doesn't refer to that rectangular shape anymore. So it's almost kind of like contemporary. I don't often like that word because I'm contemporary, even though I do what people think of as traditional artwork. But it's really super cool. And then on another level, I know as a carver, to make a face, whether or not that face was added after, like inlaid, or if it was a part of the original board, either way, that's a heck of a lot of work. In the old days, because they're making those boards by hand. There's no mills getting this ready for you. So you've got to leave that part thicker, if it is a part of it, and then by hand flatten out the rest of the board to a bendable width. Or you have to carve out that rectangle and inlay this whole other face in there. And either way, it's probably part of the board, I would think.
Well, actually, I think these might be inlaid because both those faces, when you can see the slide up close, which I can, have little brads where they've been nailed in. But one of the things that I love about this piece, and this was new, I hadn't seen this until I saw that wonderful book, Where the Power Is. I like the dynamic between the form line and the face on these, so that the face that is very serious and not as sort of dynamic and expressive, has these surrounding ovoids that are just, they're going along in a line. There's a straight one on the side. There's a couple more on the top. It's like quite practiced. It's sort of quite, I don't know how to describe it. And then the other one, which has this mischievous little grin, is not square. The face isn't square, right? It's much more rounded. It has more of an angle to it. And it's surrounded by this much more, flowy, dynamic set of form lines. And it helps bring out the expressiveness of each of those faces.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I've thought too much about. And now I want to go back and look at other frontlets and things where there's form lines surrounding naturalistic looking faces and see what is the feeling that you get from the form line itself, and does it actually add into the power of the face?
All of you who have taken my design classes, I hope, will know after listening to what Katie was just saying, why the form line is doing what it's doing on the left image as opposed to why it's doing what it is on the right. And it all has to do with the shape of those two faces, that the form line is going to flow with these hard edged lines that you use to create the edge of the space that you're filling. And the squarer one is going to create this squarer, stiffer area of design. But if you add that curve, man, form line on a curve, it's like what do they say? It's like butter. It's just so satisfying.
Yeah, the energy that radiates off of the curved line, or radiates off of, when we look at chess and we see the, let's get a great chess design, like this one, right? We see that, okay, we get into all the super geeky words, right? We have the symmetry and we have, right, what Wilhelm called non-parallelism. So, right, the fact that the angles from the bottom are stacking up at a greater and greater degree as you go along the sort of registers of form line gives you that energy, right? That curve, and the curve coming off the side, which then dictates everything else that's going to be built along from it, gives you that energy.
This is one of those pieces that, knowing this was made back in the 1800s, occasionally can make a modern artist think, why am I even trying? why am I giving this a shot? Because if they could do that with the tools that were available to them compared to the amazing tools that are available to us now, imagine what those guys could be doing with what we have available to us now. It's kind of even scary to think about it. But this chest is one of the great form line masterpieces to me. And again, it's that flow. I mean, if all my form line students look at the consistency of weight throughout this design, it's just flawless. And even the change up of color, look just for color balance right up at the top. On either side of the center of the face, there's a little red connector that's connecting to a black U-form, which is technically part of the primary form line. And inside of that goes to that fine-legged, filled top U-form inside of that. But that little red connector up there could have, and, would probably be black if anyone was really thinking about it, because it's up there with the rest of the main form line. But there you go, you switch because you need to for that color balance. Yeah, just fabulous.
Then we looked at this and talked about the fact that that sense of, right, on this one, it's such the weight of primary and secondary are so consistent, right? So equally spread across the design. And then you get into this guy's piece and you have a whole nother way of dealing with weight and balance.
Right. I think this artist must have done screens or house fronts. I mean, the switch from the thickness of the positive, which, like we talked about the other day, it's almost pushing on ultra primary, even though it isn't at the same time. It's a really odd approach, but so fantastic. And I think this is a great example to show, especially students who are, maybe you're itching to want to do new things, but you can do new things that totally fit within the style of the art. Because this is really odd that all of this black thick form line is bordered with these little red strips of color, and then all of the stuff inside of that is connected to those red strips, not to the black primary form line. This is a very strange design, but it's absolutely gorgeous, and so much fun. I think this guy was just having fun, and I'm having fun because of it.
Yes, well, you and I could keep having fun geeking out over all of these on, and we have way more pictures that we picked out to share, but I know we have students in the class.
Yeah, we should probably answer your questions.
And so I don't know, Marnie, if you want to choose some from the chat or let students ask them, whatever you want to do is fine with me.
Sure, I can, those that have put their questions in the chat, we can start with those, and then if anyone else wants to add questions that way or speak up, either way works. The first question, it was directed towards David and asking, are there connections between the art and the dance? And if there are any connections that are obvious, are you willing to share? He said he was reading Bill Holmes' text and thought that the postscript in the second edition was evocative of this question.
I mean, yeah, there's one of the things that initially comes to mind, I think, to preface my answer, is that I can only give you my guess as to how it really connects, for as much as I have experience in our dance and our ceremonies and potlatch that have come back in my lifetime, that there was a true break, not necessarily because we have videos of the old people dancing and stuff. I mean, we know that's how they moved. The break comes from true knowledge of how and why form line is what it is. So I think I know what you're talking about. Bill talked about the way the lines move echoes the way our dancers move, the ebb and flow of the design. I think to a degree that's probably true. Every art represents or displays the culture it comes from. In my mind, form line connects a lot more to the strict nature of our culture, the protocols and the demands on behavior and how you're to act in everyday life and at feasts and that kind of thing. And I do think that strict kind of protocol is definitely a part of form line. But I mean, on a broader sense, absolutely, it's all connected. Every aspect of our culture is related to every other aspect of it. And I think that's one of the things that separates it the most from particularly modern Western culture is there is a direct line you can tie to every other part of our culture from all the other parts. And that's, to me, that's one of the hardest things we've had reconnecting with, pulling our minds out of this modern way of thinking to how our ancestors thought. And a lot of that's been helped for me personally by studying my language. I find I've not that the language has impacted my form line as far as, you know, all of a sudden I understand why it is the way it is. But I find that I approaching it from a more knowledgeable standpoint of my own history and being able to think through our language has helped connect, at least emotionally and philosophically, between the art and why it's made, why it's used the way it is.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge that museums and scholarship for a long time did a lot of damage to that holistic connection that should be in place, right? So when you go and a collection was made and all of the material culture, the artworks were put in museums and the oral histories were put in books somewhere else, and maybe wax cylinder recordings of songs went to a third repository, and everything was divided up and chunked out into sections of knowledge that fall under anthropology and art history and biology and natural science in a way that is not at all reflective of how people lived and interacted with their land and their community and their other than human relatives and all of the creations that they made, right? So that a song would exist perhaps before a mask existed, or the right to that, whatever it is in your community, naknok or
Yeah.
a crest, the right exists first. Then maybe the song has existed for generation, but a new mask needs to be made. And that's, you know, the knowledge of those things lives behind the original creation of the mask. And as much as you can go to a museum and look at the pieces or read in books, it's needing to learn the language, needing to learn the songs and the dances that helps really understand how these things came to look and be the way they are.
I just helped the American Museum of Natural History do some Somalia labels for their new Northwest Coast Hall, and one of the pieces had to do with this crest that in English is called boiling words. And because I had been doing study on our Adao, our oral history, I had come across that story. So I was able to go find, at first I thought I was going to have to make up how I thought you'd translate boiling words, which is never what you end up finding in the old stories. You know, there was a name that had to do with something that was going on at the time that maybe isn't directly translatable to what the English says. But that was the word. So I could find the word of that crest to give the museum, because that's what it's called, not my literal translation of the English that was translated from the story that my ancestors had used. So that was a really neat process to help reclaim or rejoin those things that should have been together all along.
Yeah, and that's why museums need to work in collaboration with community members, because you cannot do that without the knowledge to bring those things together.
Yeah.
This leads directly into our next question. For both of you, what are your first few steps in visiting a new museum, especially when permission has been given to go behind the scenes into a collections area? How do you prepare?
Well, I will, if they have an online collection, I'll try to go through that first and pick out things that I want to see and ask if those things are available to be seen. Sometimes they're on display and can't be pulled out of the display case, and other times they're in the collections and are available. So let them know that ahead of time if possible, or give a list of the kind of items you'd like to see. I want to see Tsimshian carvings, and usually for Tsimshian you want to include Niska and Giksan because they're often lumped together and stylistically they're the same general style. And make sure you book yourself enough time. That's my advice. Usually a couple hours. You know, most of the time I go into those collections, I want to just pitch a tent and stay for a while. So make sure you book yourself enough time.
Yeah, and those are some of the really logistical parts of it for sure. But it's good to leave enough time, because sometimes I have noticed over these years that it can be an emotional experience for people.
Yeah.
And hopefully, if you're working with people who understand and have these experiences, they're going to make space for you to step away, to take some time, or to really just sit and visit with a piece. We had a wonderful woman in who connected with a piece by her father who she had never known. So she just needed to take that time. Some people prepare spiritually to come. So there are groups who either prepare before they come into the Burke, or they might take some time to sing a song before they enter, or lots of times people sing in the collections and with the creations. And it's a wonderful experience to hear the drums and the voices, echoing through. And I always envision that so many of the creations, whether they're from that community or not, are like enlivened by that experience. So there's that side of it as well. And don't be afraid to ask for what you want. And don't be afraid to give information, or if you're traveling with an elder who understands, or you understand cultural protocols and the museums are not following them, they probably don't know. And hopefully they really want to know. And so I would encourage you to do that too.
Just to follow up on that, one of the things, because I've gone to collections with lots of different people, and there have been times where people have wanted to, to pray or sing a song, or and then there are certain items that because of old stories and things we've heard, that they maybe don't want to see certain things, whether they're shaman items or things like that. For me, and again, I just want to pass for anybody who's questioning how they're going to react in these moments. I have a really firm belief that our ancestors and the beings that are stored in these museums know what happened to us. And I think safer around those pieces because they want us to know again. I've never been afraid of anything I've seen in those places, because I believe they know why I'm there. And so I just want to pass that on, because I think they would want us to know. They'd want us to learn. And if you refuse to see something just because, maybe it was a shaman's item and maybe there was these powers attached to it, but I think there's all of the other powers that are with you to help you learn. And that's my feeling about how that works. And I just want to pass that on to you all if you have these opportunities.
And I guess I'll jump in to answer a question that I feel like is right along those lines. Sid asked about when people donate new pieces to museums, a little bit about what's our protocol. So at the Burke and like other places, we try to acquire pieces. I, at the moment, try and acquire contemporary Northwest Coast pieces, because the next generations, now seeing all of these people who come through to study at the Burke and knowing people who have come 20 years ago and 30 and they're going to bring their kids, they need to be able to study what was made in 2020 when they come to visit in 2070. So that's, really important. When something older, historical is being offered, I often you asked if there was tribal consultation. I might get in touch if that community has a museum. I might get in touch with that museum and find out if they would like to have this piece first and encourage the donor to return that home. So that happens sometimes. There have been a number of those over the years. Sometimes people are, they're from Seattle and the Burke is their museum, or they're from New York and AM&H is their museum, and they would like to put that piece there. And then you respect it and you hope that people are going to come from community to the museum and experience those pieces. If something falls under federal regulations like NAGPRA, so they came from a grave, they're sacred, they're cultural patrimony, those really should go directly back to communities. And museums can try and help facilitate in any possible way for communication, but it's best, I wouldn't bring those directly into a collection now. So I hope that answers your question, Sid.
David, there's 2 questions. One is, what is your favorite medium to work in? And the other is, roughly how many pieces have you completed?
Well, the second question, I don't know. A lot. I've probably carved around 25 totem poles. It's got to be pushing 30 here, I think. Dozens of masks, bentwood boxes, lots of drums, regalia. I don't know, it's a lot. It's a lot. Now with digital work, I'm able to push out designs a lot faster than having to paint them, so that it's increasing all the time. My favorite medium, there's some things that tie that I wouldn't feel fair to just say. There's just drawing is probably my favorite thing in the world to do. It has been since I was a little boy. So a pencil and a piece of paper, and that has nothing to do with me selling my art and making a career or being a traditional artist. It's because I love creating something out of my mind with that pencil lead on paper. And to me, it's that kind of feeling. It depends on the medium for anybody, but it's that feeling that how you know you're an artist. Like, I'm not doing it to make money. I'm doing it because there's nothing else that satisfies me more. But if you're talking about Northwest Coast art medium, I'm fairly certain, and again, this has to do with that story about me pooping on my dad's shop floor. I love carving totem poles. Carving totem poles, to be able to make monumental art is amazing, but I also am sure that it's tied emotionally for me to my upbringing and the life I've been lucky enough to lead because of my dad. I see Kimberly's question about is there spiritual practice associated with my art? So how does that manifest? Depending on the project, I will sometimes approach things different ways, especially if I know it's going to be either regalia or artwork that's made for traditional purposes. Totem poles that are going to be made for the real reasons rather than for commercial type settings or private homes, where there'll be prayers associated with it. I'll often do burnings where I burn and offer food. And then at the end, the ceremonial part of it is meaningful. And I've gotten to a point, I think in my career, I talked earlier about how long I've been doing this, 34 years, where I'm in a lot of ways kind of over the commercial end of this as an artist. And it's the creation part that's always there, the love of that, but the pieces that are made for ceremonial purpose, things that are made for the real thing, are what excite me anymore. So I think there's also just a conscious spiritual connection when I'm creating, like I did a design recently based on an old story I read. And so while it may not manifest necessarily in anything, any kind of act or this is the design. It's about this is the mother of beavers. It's the origin of the beaver story, and it sometimes is just this conscious feeling as I'm working, and a lot of times those moments come when I know I'm. How do I say this without sounding? When I know I've nailed it. Sometimes right away, oh, I did it. you haven't even finished the thing and oh, I got him this time. And that's how I felt on this design. I really love this design. But it's, I think it also manifests in the sense of peace. And matter of fact, I can't work when either my personal life or the world around me is chaotic. I can't work and I don't want to. Like it doesn't. Nothing flows when that happens. So it's like weaving, where you shouldn't work when you're in a bad place, and I do feel like that extends to my end of Northwest Coast art.
Katie, is there a particular historic piece in the Burke Museum's collection that really stands out to you as being particularly exquisite?
There are many, and I know that's not a very fair answer, but Davey said earlier, you'd be amazed at how many pieces are out across the world. So the Burke has close to 12,000 pieces from the Northwest Coast, right? There's over 50,000 cultural creations in our collections, but 12,000 pieces from the Northwest Coast. And we are the 6th largest collection in the United States. So there are just tens and tens and tens of thousands of pieces of Northwest Coast art out across the world. And you see things that you never expected to see. And it's so much, when I came into this, I was in love with formline, as so many people are, and I still am, as you can tell from this evening. But now I am in love with aprons, dance aprons, and particularly Kwakwaka'wakw ones, which look very different. They're not formline, they're and button blankets, and particularly the borders on Kwakwaka'wakw button blankets, which are like baskets entirely, both of these things entirely within the women's realm of design, aesthetics. There's a lot of freedom in how you create and what the iconography is. But it's still very grounded in cultural practices and connected to song and connected to dance and chiefly positions and names. So now I'm very much in love with those pieces. But I do have to say that I get great joy out of talking very deeply into the minutia of formline as well. So, and I'm starting to bring that fascination into textiles, and that's a wonderful thing too. And I'll put a little plug in, even though we have spent our time this evening looking at mostly the carvings by men, and that new book, Where the Power Is, which I'm a huge fan of, also really focuses on carvings, and so many of the collections do. And that is a result not only of the fact that they're, amazing creations, but a result of biases of collectors and what the European conceptions of great art were, carving, sculpture, painting, architecture, right? Those are the triumvirate of Western art history. And you put that together with the creation of monumental pieces by men on the Northwest Coast, and you get a very skewed version that is reproduced in museum collections and in publications of what was made on the coast. But if you went to a totem pole raising or a house raising or any of these things, you can't show up without all of the regalia, right? All of those things that people wear that were essential to identity and to doing things properly were made by women. And we know that women were doing a lot of planning and a lot of taking care and a lot of holding knowledge, even though they may not have been out in the public monumental art sphere. And that goes on to today. So while we've spent our day talking about carvings, I'm spending a lot of time these days trying to bring more attention to the artwork and the historical role of women.
That's absolutely. And as a lot of you know, my girlfriend, Candy McGilton, is a weaver of our local basket style, learned from Holly and Dolores Churchill. She's been confronted with this fact, and while we were in Geneva, the masks that I made for that exhibit were chosen for several publications. I had no control over this. They just, you know, the museum owned these pieces, and these people asked to get pictures of them, and they published them. And one of them was used for the poster of this exhibit, you know, and not Candy's amazing baskets and this big cedar bark mat she made. You know, people, not many cedar bark mats are made anymore. I think my job and a lot of other carvers need to do a better job of promoting quote unquote women's arts. There's a imbalance that has happened within the culture, especially for our peoples who have let go of the chief system and are functioning kind of more on a Western system. The idea of a matrilineal society has been mistaken for a matriarchal society, and the place of the man in our culture is not what it should be. The balance between man and woman culturally, you know, you get everything from your mother, and the role of the father has lost some of its importance, and I hope that comes back. But in the art, it's the other way around. The male arts get all this attention because totem poles are these massive things, and masks hang on a wall, and a human style face naturally fascinates us as human beings. We're drawn to those things. But I could chop down a tree today and have a mask for you day after tomorrow. You can't, a weaver has to go collect that bark, split it, clean it, let it dry, cut it into strips, do all of that prep that takes hours and hours, and in the amount of time I could have a mask finished for you. They're just ready. If they want to use that bark they just gathered, but they're probably using last year's bark, they're just ready to start their basket. You know, and there's a disconnect in how complicated women's arts are compared to ours. We're the simpletons to me in this equation. You know, except for maybe the rules of form line, but even once you get that, that's even a lot simpler than the math and everything that's involved with weaving that I'm astounded by and I can't do.
And if you're weaving a Chilkat Nahin robe, you got to know how to do form line and the weaving and the prep and the math.
So it's
and
not,
you're going to be paid far, far less.
And that's, to me, that's the biggest crime. You know, you see people women who I just think the world of, not able to charge what their pieces are worth. Yes. On the market, because people don't understand what goes into it. There are elements of what I do that happens to. Bowls and rattles don't often sell the way they should, and I've been talked down by galleries. And again, it's something that can hang on a wall, and then you could stand and look at, is more appealing to the general buying audience than something that maybe can sit on an end table, or, you know, and you don't understand that it's as much work to carve a bowl as it is to carve a mask. So yeah, more needs to be done to balance out the attention of all of our art forms and
institutions too. So when you're getting your % for public art, or you're commissioning new monumental pieces, you can think really creatively about how women's textiles or other creations could be brought into your buildings and your big public spaces in ways that are respectful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of totem poles these days, and it's because that's where people go to first, because it's, you know, it's one of those things that you think it's so iconically Northwest Coast. And they are impressive. I mean, they are.
Yeah.
But so is a Chilkat blanket.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just need to do better.
Yes. So thank you for entertaining our soapbox.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions, and one of them really connects to what you're talking about. We have a student asking, in painted form line, the human hands have 5 fingers, yet in Chilkat weaving, the weavers won't weave a design with 5 fingers. Do you have any thoughts as to why the ancestors would paint different than they would weave?
I don't know. Katie, do you have an answer to that before I give my thoughts?
All I know is that the weavers say that's how they were taught. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not going to make any guesses.
Yeah, this is another one of those ones that I think, firstly, that I accept. If, you know, there was thankfully with Chilkat weaving, there was some uninterrupted knowledge that got passed down. And if that's what those elders that preserved that style said, then that's, you know, I'm not going to argue with that. On the other hand, my buddy Tyson and I were talking once. I said, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to go back in time and ask about, you know, why form line is the way it is? He said, yeah, but if you went back 500 years ago, you're going to get a different answer than if you went back 1500 years ago. So in that, and I'm not trying to start any conflicts here, it's possible that that's not always how it was, or that the reason for it isn't exactly how we say it is now. But again, I'm going to defer to the elders who had that knowledge, and if that's what's been passed down, that's the way it is. I've never been one to gladly accept when I hear there's only one way to do something. Some of that comes from what happened to us. You know, there's a break in knowledge. There were the few elders left, and they were able to say, that's how I remember it. So that's how it was done. If we were to, again, just like Tyson's, but if we could go back further, maybe we could get a deeper explanation as to why that bit of knowledge was there. So I think it behooves us to take all the knowledge we can gather, put it together, and guess on what we can, accept the direct knowledge that is available, but to take all of that and figure out how we make that ours now, because it is ours now. It's our right to use our culture of what the bits and pieces that we have left of how it used to be, and make it fit for who we are today. That's our right. We can't pretend like, there used to be a saying that went around when I was younger, that we're merely imitating our ancestors. I don't like that one bit, because in the culture, the way I've learned our culture is we are our ancestors. That, you know, that we are the reincarnation of those people. And when they lived, it's clear to me from everything I've learned that they were able to adjust and move and flow with the things that were presented to them, while at the same time standing on the foundation of our culture and how we interact with one another. And to me, it's the same thing nowadays. If something new is presented, if an occasion comes up that we're not used to, we take what we have as that foundation and we do what's best for us today. Our ancestors would not want us copying them, because that's like we're pretending. You know, we're not really being. We need to claim it and use it and be it now. But again, standing on that foundation, that little bit of foundation that we got left, it is a good guide. You know, the basics are there. whether it's potlatch, whether it's formline, whether it's chilcat weaving, there is a foundation to stand on. And we should never let that foundation go, no matter where we choose to make it go now. And because our culture now is not what it was 150 years ago, and it wouldn't have been even if it hadn't been interrupted. It would have changed, because that's what cultures do. So we can't be afraid of the new, but like I said, not new for the sake of it. New because that's what we're choosing to make a serious adaptation or introduction into this amazing culture that we have. It has to feel like it belongs, just like Eden Shaw's plates, those argillite plates with the little guy sitting on it. That wasn't Haida art prior to contact, but it's as Haida as it gets now. Button blankets are only 200 years old, but that's as Northwest Coast as it gets. But you see all these examples I'm bringing up, that they were incorporated, not just done for the sake of it. They were brought into our way of understanding. And I think that's how we should approach these new things and new times.
And the museum collections, we started talking about how to learn from museum collections, will uphold what Davy is saying, that elders and artists who have been practicing for decades will come in and say, oh, look at this beginning to this basket. Look at this ending to this weave. Look at this corner of form line. There's always the unexpected. There's always something, no matter how much you think this is the way it's done, everybody's an individual, and you'll find those dynamic things because they were answering the question that was needed at the time.
Yeah.
One last quick question, David, and this is something you and I've talked a little bit about in regards to classes here at the Totem Heritage Center. But we have a student asking that they know that there's formline workshops or classes that exist, but they often only seem to offer introductions. And what do you see as being an ideal way for new artists to learn ways to advance beyond that?
Well, I mean, taking the workshops is good. I got to stop saying I'm writing a book and I just need to finish the damn thing.
Yes.
But formline is the kind of thing, and this ties to an issue I have actually with teaching Northwest Coast art in a like a university type setting, is that I would never want someone to come out of that thinking that they're ready to have a career. They've just learned the basics. And then there's it's like somebody learned to be a cook. You don't come out of culinary school a chef. You have the basic tools you need to go out and start working and figuring out how to do it. So it does take a lot of time and a lot of effort. It can be done all on your own. That's possible because there's a lot of Northwest Coast artists who have done it. My dad is an example of that, and he did it from studying in museums and looking at books and just figuring it out and banging his head against the wall. So it's not the way I'd recommend it, but it's possible. If you're lucky enough to find a teacher, the thing to be careful about there is not every great artist is a good teacher, and not every good teacher is a great artist. So be cautious of that. But the thing that the counter to that is you should learn from as many people as you can learn from. I learned enough from my dad and studying the old pieces that I could have had a fine career, knowledgeable basis to make my life from. But I knew I could learn things from Robert Davidson, So I asked him if I could go work with him, and I got to go work with him for 2 years. And it was one of the best things I ever did. So, you know, I'm lucky to say that I'm a student of David Boxley and Robert Davidson. You know, there aren't a lot of people who can say that. And I'm very conscious of the good fortune I have. It does, but no matter who teaches you, it does come down to your own time. How much are you going to commit to this? I've had students take my, a beginning class twice, and I know that they didn't draw one day after the first class was over to the time they started the second class. I knew they didn't, because I was explaining the same mistakes that I explained the first time. And I encourage all my students, you got to keep drawing. You can't stop when this class is over, but you can't stop if that's what you want to do. If you're just doing it to do it, it's never going to be what it can be. You got to want it in your soul, because it's too hard otherwise. It's miserable, and you can't do it for the money, because most of the time you don't make money for the longest time. It's got to be because you want it more than anything. Having said all that, I would love someday to teach a series of classes that are advanced formline classes. They would have to include relief carving, because formline started as a carved art form. The way it's drawn and painted is because of how it's carved, and you're never going to understand the art form fully until you carve it. So, and I learned that lesson the hard way. I was designing things as a teenager, and my dad said, David, you got to learn how to carve this stuff, because you would know that you can't do that. You can't do what you're painting right there. And it was a good lesson. So at some point that'll happen, especially once we get a better handle on the world. The world is nuts at the moment, but I can't express to you enough that you need to study Out of the Transforming Image and any other books that have pieces. I'm very proud. Any other pieces that have this quality of form line, I'm very proud of this house front. Again, I wanted it to fit, and everything that's going on this house front you can find on old pieces. Study those things and replicate. Just don't take credit for it. That's all. Don't copy something and then say it's yours. You got to say that I copied this, because there's a lot of that out there these days too. That we need.
Cite your sources, even as an artist.
Yeah, cite your sources. Yeah.
Give credit where it's due.
I copied a ton of Captain Carpenter and Charles Edenshaw. And you want to learn about negative space, those two guys, Charles Edenshaw and Captain Carpenter, the way they dealt with the area outside of formline is just magical. So I'm not, it's a hard question to answer, because there's not a single place to go. I'm trying to work on that single place. It's hard to write a book and live and do everything else all at the same time. But don't buy how-to formline books. Because they're not even made with the best of intentions. I've never seen one that actually properly teaches the art form. They mesh styles from the coast. They include southern things that aren't technically northern formline, and it's a mess. There are videos on YouTube. SHI has published some things of me teaching and other folks, Steve Brown and stuff. So I would recommend those.
Come to the University of Washington. We have lots of guest speakers and art classes.
You guys really should take advantage of the Bill Holmes Center. They're great, and I've probably been to the Burke more in my life than any other museum ever. So take advantage of not only of what they have to offer, but they're nice people. which
And you don't have to have a grant to come. So
Yeah.
if you happen to come through Seattle, you're on your way to somewhere else, call us up. You can come in, have an appointment. Doesn't have to be special.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us.
I have a question. Marnie.
Okay.
I have a question for both of you guys, actually. What is the oldest raven rattle that you have, either one of you have seen or know of?
I want to say that I'm aware that I've seen one that must have been collected in the late 1700s.
I would say that's probably correct.
I don't know how old that one was when it was collected. You know, I don't, if it had been around for 100 years or if it had been made 5 years before it was collected.
Do you
That's-
think, do you
Go
think that raven rattles need more, post-contact tools?
Well, I mean, they certainly made the one I made easier than what I imagine it must have been like pre-contact, but there's some amazing stuff that was made with
Yes.
pre-contact tools. So no, I don't think so. But I wish I knew how they did it, because it's getting in there under the bodies and between legs and all that stuff on those rattles is pretty astounding. But I've read the Simpson origin of where the origin of those rattles, and it's a mythical, amazing story. And so they're old, they're pre-contact items, but yeah, I can't be for sure that it's any older than that I'm aware of, late 1700s probably.
Many of those things in museum collections don't have dates, and so
Yeah.
we don't.
Because there are some things that were collected then, like in 1790 or whatever.
That were
That
clearly
very well-
100 years old already.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. So
And then this box you were talking about that
Yeah.
was dated, and the more and more, dating technology we get,
yeah,
further back in time, everything is being dated to, which of course, everybody, people in communities already know all of this. But it just is one more piece of the puzzle.
like, and again, learning our stories, I've always heard the idea that totem poles, the concept of totem poles originate with the Haida, and then moved east and north and south from there. Well, I came across an old story where the Simpson people in a canoe were going across the Haida Gwaii, and they looked down in the water as they were approaching Haida Gwaii, and there were houses submerged under the water with these carved posts that you could still see as you looked over. And the story makes it sound like there was this magical place down under the water, but we know that there are submerged
Mhm.
villages because of the melting of the ice after the ice age that covered up these old places. So it totally makes sense that someone at some point could still see those buildings under the straits there. But to me, that says if you could still see those buildings, you're talking about right after the ice age that we had house posts. So it wasn't like totem poles were invented 500 years ago. They were probably invented thousands of years ago, which always makes me feel better somehow. We were made to feel like everything was primitive, and we just kind of, everything was just recent, and it wasn't. We're ancient. Everybody feel pumped up? Let's go to work.
One more question. Thank you for that. That was a good answer. My last question is, how often do you see a new shape or style in form line?
I don't know that I've ever seen a new shape, at least not one that I liked. I got to admit that I'm a bit of a, I'm very picky when it comes to form line, and there have been moments where, like, I did something that I felt was different, but it's so subtle, no one's going to notice it. Like, it wasn't some amazing big thing. I just attached a line a different direction or something. Robert Davidson has done some things with form line, not in his more abstract stuff, but where he's still sticking to what you'd think of as more traditional form line. But like, once I saw he did a salmon trout, but he treated even the ovoids like fine line legged U forms, you know, where it's only filled in at the top and the rest is thin. And he did the whole salmon trout design that way, and it was really beautiful. Form line, again, I go back to that. This system developed for a reason. Things go where they go on purpose. Not that you can't be creative with how they go together, but if you're going to choose those pieces, there's a certain number of combinations that you can use those particular pieces in that particular space. Sometimes it's a lot of combinations, but there's even more combinations of how to do it where it doesn't fit the system. And it's fine if you want to go off and do something else. I'm just not going to consider it form line, because form line is a system. And I do look forward, though, to the day where somebody who's done enough study figures out something to add to it. But the chances of that, again, thousands of years they worked on this. I don't know if we're capable of like adding a new shape, because all these things work a particular way. It's possible, though. I'm not going to say it's not possible. Katie, what do you think?
And let's remember that if you look back at what we now understand to be maybe 16th, 15th, 14th century form line, when you had fewer metal tools, you get these really big primary form lines with the most minimal secondary, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them hardly have secondary. The secondary is just suggested by one V cut or something like that. So the really elaborate secondary forms that you see behind Davy on his house front, and then, you know, the sub-secondary or the ultra primary, we don't see those 500 years ago, right? And so the system, the foundation of the system is there, obviously, as you say, in that ancient box. But yeah, sub-secondary, you know, U complexes that stack and stack and stack, those weren't there, but they came along. They make absolute sense. Now we think of them as typical building blocks in the system. And so, yes, there's, you know, there are practices that Davidson and others have done that are going to start showing up, you know, more, and other people will take it along to the next place as well. And we'll just think of that as part of form line, but it is based on those, you know, particular elements and a way of relating to each other, and that resulting space that always comes, that balance of positive and negative, that's hopefully always going to be there.
Yeah. And sometimes I'm probably not the best person to ask about these things, because I want it to be what it is, because I love it the way it is. On the other hand, like I said, I've incorporated that floral type stuff into it. So, you know, it'll happen when it happens. And some of us will go kicking and screaming before it's, before we accept it. But
yeah, invite us back in 20 years and we'll complain about it all.
Yeah.
Or be excited, one or the other.
But again, if you've studied enough, you'll know when it works.
Yeah.
You know, something new will fit in. You'll think, gee, that's new. And you'll sit and think about it, and you think, I can't think of any reason that can't do that. And that's when you know, and that's when it's exciting. And call me and let me know what you did.
Yeah, we'll happily geek out about it for
so I can steal it.
thank you all for your patience and hanging in there with us.
No, thank you both for sharing your knowledge with us, for taking so much time with us to answer all the questions. We so appreciate having you both here with us tonight, and love the conversation. So we will have another History of Northwest Coast art presentation next week with Steve Brown and Stephen Jackson. So we hope to see everybody there next week, and I hope you all have a good night. Thank you again, Katie and David.
Thank you so
Marnie.
much.
Thank you, Katie. This is a
Thank you,
joy.
Davey.
And I'm very impressed, Marnie, with your slate of speakers. I'm really honored to be among this pretty great group you have doing these presentations. So
Yeah,
thank
it was pretty amazing when that whole poster came out. And I was like, oh, wow.
you. Yeah.
We're super excited about this new series, and we're honored to have both of you be part of it. So thank
Thanks
you.
very
Very
much.
nice. Okay, well, I hope to talk to more of you, all of you, some of you again. Bye.
Thank you
Have a
guys
good
both
night.
so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, David, for everything you do.
Thanks very much. Good night, folks.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.